On behalf of the Global Leaders Council for Reproductive Health, I'd like to welcome you to the Aspen Institute. My name is Ariana Childs-Graham. I'm the Director of Reproductive Health here at the Institute, and we are delighted that you're joining us today along with this illustrious panel. The Global Leaders Council and financial resources for family planning promotes the development of and implementation of policies that improve access, availability, and affordability of family planning and reproductive health services, supplies, and information for all. The Global Leaders Council knows that sexual and reproductive health and rights are the gateway, are the catalyst to achieving smart, global climate solutions and development goals. Mary Robinson, the former president of Ireland, Special Envoy for Climate Change, and at the time, chair of the Global Leaders Council, spoke concurrent to the Rio Plus 20 conference on sustainable development. She said global leaders must recognize the role of women as agents of change in their homes, communities, and countries, and their intimate understanding of the intergenerational aspects of climate change. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, the head of UN Women and also a member of the Global Leaders Council, said that a vital but often overlooked aspect of women's empowerment is ensuring access to reproductive health and voluntary family planning services. Too many women, more than 225 million around the world, lack the information and services that would enable them to determine the number, timing, and spacing of their children. This unmet need hurts women and families, leading to high rates of unintended pregnancy and maternal and infant mortality. For inclusive, sustainable action, we must include family planning and reproductive health approaches. We need solutions that match the complexity of the issues that we're grappling with. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Tony DeCopel. I'm the host of Greenhouse, which is a show on MSNBC, on a new MSNBC channel called Shift. Shift is what's providing those cameras back there. It is kind of like cable, except you get it through the internet, you get it on your phone. People are changing the way they watch TV, and so we are changing the way we deliver it. As we say internally, shift happens. That is not a joke. That is, in fact, what we said. We have an illustrious panel here. Indeed, they have extended bios in the packet that you should have picked up at the door. I'll just introduce them briefly. To my immediate left, we have the Honorable Julia Duncan-Cassell, Minister from Liberia. We have, to her left, the Right Honorable Helen Clark, the Administrator of the United Nations Development Program, yeah. Okay, and to her left, we have Dr. Jennifer Adams, who is Deputy Assistant Administrator, Bureau of Global Health, U.S. Agency for International Development. Now, we will get to them, but by way of a few introductory remarks, I wanted to say that I think this is a really great time to be having this conversation. We are in April, which means we're in the quarter-mile marker coming out of the COP20 meeting in Lima. And that was a big deal, right? Because the call for action, the document that resulted from that meeting, included 4 distinct references to gender. They're a little bit vague, and we could probably stand to talk about what is meant by these references. Gender-responsive climate policies, gender-sensitive climate policies, and then 2 more references with gender-sensitive and gender-responsive. We should definitely talk about what is meant by that. I think we can say right off the bat that it means that when countries are coming up with plans to respond to climate change, they take into consideration the needs of women. So if they know that in a given country women are primarily responsible for the local gardening or fuel acquisition, that whatever policy, whatever mitigation strategy is in place, it just recognizes that. And in addition to that, I think it also refers to sexual and reproductive health, allowing women access to the ability to choose when they have children, and for a very important reason, to set up a situation where as climate change hits their communities, they will be in a position to be resilient today, not overburdened by children they didn't intend, didn't plan for, and also in a position to have an easier time as they go forward, not struggling with additional demands on their time and attention as things get more difficult. So great progress out of Lima. similar language coming out of a meeting in Geneva in February. I think we all know that heading into September's Sustainable Development Goals, gender is a very big part of the conversation. And yet, despite all this progress, 20 years after most countries on this earth recognize the connection between population and development, there are no countries that I'm aware of that have funded any family planning as a climate change mitigation strategy. There are about 41 countries that have filed plans with the UN, and 6 of them mention family planning, only 6, and none have funded it. So how can that be? Something is not connecting here. And I want to open up the conversation by going to the Right Honorable Helen Clark. I think we need to set up the value proposition here. So what is the relationship, as you see it, between gender, resilience, climate mitigation, and adaptation?
Thank you very much, and to co-panelists and everyone here. Thinking about the links between these dots, it seems to me that climate change exacerbates every existing vulnerability. And women still around our world enjoy less equal status in a number of respects. And also we're far from the MDG goal of universal access to sexual and reproductive health rights. So with the new climate change agreement due to be agreed in December, with the new sustainable development agenda due to be agreed in September, we have a chance to press on all of these points in a way which is mutually reinforcing. And we have a number of entry points in the new SDG agenda with the specific goals on gender equality and women's empowerment, specific targets on sexual and reproductive health, and then also climate change specifically targeted in the agenda as well. Now, it's not like the agenda is specifically pointing out these links, but they're all in there, and sustainable development does tend to connect everything. So I think what we need is a sort of chain that goes from saying we've got a couple of fundamental, well, 3 fundamental problems here: lack of access to sexual and reproductive health, linking to lack of empowerment for women and ongoing unequal status, and then this huge and disproportionate impact which climate change is placing on women, who are the majority of the world's food producers in developing countries, but get the worst land, are more vulnerable, more at risk when there's drought or something else wiping out production. That with climate change comes more difficulties getting water, women having to walk further. That puts them at more risk of sexual assault and attack, which feeds back then into the reproductive health agenda. Pregnancies result from that. So I think a session like this enables us to link these areas, which may seem quite separate, but actually aren't. There's a sort of chain of events which link them together. And when we talk about the issues, we should draw those links.
Yeah, the connections are profound. We have not seen them made explicitly in policy yet, but in an interesting way, it is beginning to be made in business. Recently, the founder of 7th Generation, the paper products, the idea is you make decisions today that will be good for Generation 7 out. Obviously, a very far-seeing business person. He's a professor at NYU, sustainable business practices. What business did he decide to get into next? The condom business. He said because it connects the dots. All the issues he's cared about his entire life can be addressed in some way through better family planning, better access to contraceptives. Dr. Adams, what are the connections that you see, and coming from a health perspective, between women's rights and climate?
So thank you. I think a few things. One is that, as you said, Tony, these are big topics. So the topic of climate change in and of itself has a world of experts that are negotiating and know the details and know the numbers and sit together repeatedly and develop quite a lot of expertise and a lot of familiarity and are very good at articulating aspirational goals and targets and objectives. And I think the same can be same is true for the health community and for the reproductive health and family planning community. So part of the value in a conversation like this, I think, is, as you said, to remind people that you have a great deal of expertise, but it can tend to be siloed. And then in those silos, you can sometimes tunnel down or focus very narrowly and forget some of the links and forget some of the externalities, in some sense, to a model that is very highly defined. So I think that's the case in some ways with health, including reproductive health and climate change, where certainly they are both very important sustainable development goals and linked in many ways, acknowledged, I think, in the frameworks. But in reality, a lot of times both the conversations, and then in some cases even the programs, tend to be developed independently one of another. So I think these kinds of conversations and broadening everyone's thought patterns a little bit to think about this is important. And in the case of climate change, I think it is important to see how, both in terms of the overall size and structure of the world's population, there are pretty explicit links to climate and to the impact of climate change. And then also in disease, because the change in climate will impact vectors, will impact weather events, will impact a lot of things that eventually go down to the lives of daily people, but not in a way that you can necessarily address in a health clinic. So again, you have to think more broadly of ways in which these events or these aspirational goals can be addressed that have to get you out of what you're, as a technical expert, perhaps used to doing.
Yeah, your point about silos is incredibly well taken. I'm sure a lot of people in this room will remember that last September, ahead of the big UN climate summit, major march in New York City, I remember they sounded the alarm on people who were stealing the future. The day before the UN summit, there was a summit on population. And those people didn't talk to each other. They weren't making any connection between climate and population. Unless they saw each other as one group was going to dinner and the other group was leaving, we can hope, but nothing official. It's strange. It's strange. Minister Cassell, in Liberia's case, are there already programs that you can point to that are addressing issues that we've raised so far?
Yes, thank you. Some of what we have put in place in Liberia is establishing our RARE Plus, working with the Environmental Protection and FDA, our Forestry Development Agency. We have also established our own gender and climate change strategy. We did that working with UNFCCC, and we think that brought up to the limelight what's affecting women in terms of climate change. In Liberia, our own extreme dependency on climate change is there from the fact that our women in the informal sector are agriculturalists, they are the farmers. So farming, fishery, all have an impact on women. So in the event of climate change, like what is happening now in Liberia, sea erosion is one of our biggest climate change effect. It hampers the women from farming like they should, but working with them with the new strategy and policy that we have put in place is teaching them from doing upland farming to lowland farming, from deforesting the forest to using the swamps. So that is a form of adaptation that we have put in place to work along with the women in the rural areas in how to now make farms. So those are just some of what we've done, and we work closely with RARE Plus, because they are the environmentalists and they work with the women in the rural area in teaching them about adaptation and mitigation. And due to climate change, the women move around, because sometimes they farm here this year and they do very well. And the rainfall right now is so heavy in Liberia, they have to move and go to another spot. And maybe it's not conducive for the kind of farming that they want to do, so it hampers their growth, their development, and their own ability to feed their family.
And then it compounds itself, of course. Those children don't grow up in the home that their mothers wish for them, and they have their own difficulties going forward. They become more of a burden. The economy suffers overall. I'm interested in these instructors that you mentioned that are going around and helping people adapt or mitigate to changes. or respond to changes in the climate, how receptive are people to being told, hey, you don't really want to farm there anymore, you want to move over here, or maybe you try this other crop? I can imagine if I went to Iowa right now and brought any of that up, it might be difficult.
Well, that is true. But you learn by repetition, and most of the women just need somebody to tell them. And it works good because they train them and then they train others. And from examples, so if you're farming, making rice here and maybe on the highland, you have to get men to help you to cut down the trees, burn the bushes and all before you start farming, compared to going on the lowland where you just have to swamp. You just have to lay it out correctly and do your farming, and you can continue to farm there after you harvest the rice in the next 2 to 3 months. You don't have to wait again another year. So it's easier to plant the rice on the lowland than on the highland. But it's just a matter of educating them, and that's what these people do. They are trained to go into the villages and train our women farmers on farming on the lowland and saving the forest. But then also they depend on the wood, the fire coal. So we deal with energy. We have actors who train them too on not just cooking with wood all the time, how to use the fire coal or the safe energy stove. Now that we are teaching them how to make the milking, now they are building those with clays. If you went into some of our villages now, the women are not just bending all the way to the ground to make the wood fire. They are using these clay pots that are so energy efficient, and it's even healthy for them, not carrying the baby on their back, being pregnant, and then having to carry the wood on their head anymore. So those are some of what we are training the women in this rural area to do.
Administrator Clark, I see you're writing, but I want to interrupt you. Sustainable Development Goals, which are due to be agreed upon in September, what opportunities do you see specifically within that conversation for making a link between climate and some of these sexual and reproductive rights issues?
Well, the goals are pretty much written, coming out of an open working group process at the UN General Assembly, which finished July last year. So our mind's very much turning to implementation. And given that in the end everything's linked, the most interesting initiatives to us are those which hit a number of targets at the same point. So if we take an area like what we're discussing today, climate change, gender empowerment, sexual and reproductive health, you look at something like the initiatives where we've had partnerships with Global Environment Facility and Barefoot College of India on training women to be the installers and maintainers of solar panels. Now, immediately I say that, you'll start to think, ding, ding, you see solar panel, clean energy, good for mitigating climate change. The women are trained so can get the livelihood from this installation and the maintenance. If there's electricity available in the home or the village, then the women aren't having to walk so far to get the firewood. Also helps the forest, but for the women, they're safer because the energy's at home. And of course, having energy close to home is also good for health and hygiene and other things. So in our work, we look for what are the triple or quadruple wins you're going to get off initiatives which will touch a number of these spots together. And I think we could think of many examples like that. The Minister mentioned REDD Plus and the work done to conserve the forests, another way of hitting at it, that if you can support families, communities with the clean cook stove, that's less wood that's required. It's less work for women, less burden on women and their health going to fetch the wood. Modern energy is actually one of the things that tends to link these areas. So, as I say, goals are more or less done and dusted. People are still arguing about the targets and the indicators, but let's now look at implementation. It's one thing to have goals on paper and targets on paper. What are we actually going to do about it which will make a difference for women?
You want to jump in?
Yeah, let me just say to add to what she said, some of what we were doing, what we have done, where we send women to India, to the Barefoot Institute, where they came back as engineers.
Yes.
And so it not only helped with safe energy, they all know how to make solar lights and solar panels, but it helped with sexual gender-based violence. Because then they have lights in their home, they have the little lamps that they can walk along the pathway with. So that is so important, electricity, but solar lights. And these women are all engineers, and they're training, getting that with all of these materials, that they're training other people on how to make the solar lights.
Yeah.
I find myself thinking, what role is left for men? They're not installing the solar panels. They're not the engineers.
Well, they're doing the big ones, but the women can also do that too. But
maybe we can have enough of these panels for them to
helping
monitor.
to prevent sexual gender-based violence and reproductive. Having babies by chance.
Dr. Adams, you mentioned different trajectories for the population when you look out 50 years or 100 years. How important is that trajectory to our policy? I mean, how closely should we try to change that trajectory is what I'm really asking.
Well, there's a lot of people living on the world right now, and there will be more people living on the world in the future. So I think that's sort of a reality that we're dealing with. I think that for a variety of reasons, voluntary family planning and at the individual level, at the family level, and at the community level, it is very important. It allows people freedom, it allows people choice, it allows people the ability to plan their families to meet their desires and their needs, and it helps communities to develop a certain amount of resilience, which I think we've been touching on indirectly here, that as climate change has increased and as adverse sort of impacts have hit people, the ability to have a certain measure of your life within your control, within your community's control, and to be able to plan for both good times and bad times is important. So I think at all of those levels, these programs are important, and listening to people is important, as I think both of the other panelists have been emphasizing. You know, there's a big distance between the people who are writing the climate change policies and the SDGs, but there's a lot to be gained from listening to people who experience these forces in their own lives, and listening, I think, is a good place to start.
You know, not too long ago, there was a National Academy of Science report in the United States that evaluated really fantastical possible responses to climate change, geoengineering, modifying the Earth's systems in such a way that we essentially controlled the thermostat on the globe. Just wild, out there ideas. I contrast that with, say, family planning. It seems cheap, proven, simple. Why is it not already everywhere?
Well, it is in some ways everywhere. I think Liberia, in fact, is a very good example of a country that came out of a pretty difficult time when many programs were going to be sort of difficult to maintain and get going, and yet in the last few years the use of family planning has actually doubled in just 5 years, because I think part of it is availability, part of it is making sure that there's a sustained commitment on the part of local leaders as well as international leaders. But I think, again, when you listen to people, it's something that they articulate, women and men as well, that they want and need. And so if you have a sustained commitment and an interconnected policy focus, as we've been talking about, I think you'll have it where you need it.
Minister Duncan-Cassell, could you talk a bit about the successes you've had, or lack thereof, in Liberia? I don't want to slant things.
Well, some of the successes linked to family planning, PSI, where in the schools, in the communities, kids are taught both male and female. That it's good to have baby by choice and not by chance. I think that's a good message that we continue to carry on so that they can be able to space their family and have productive children, not just having children because of choice. We work with our local midwifery communities for teenage pregnancy, early marriages. How do we prevent that? And the way we do that is by putting girls in school. So girls' education to us is very, very important. And one of the methods we've found that works very well is the boarding school system. Because you get them out of the community, they are on boarding school. So the chances completing high school is very, very high than if you just left them in the community. If you left the girls in the community, they will either get marry at an early age before their 18th birthday. And once they get married before 18, they're bound to get pregnant. And then you have fistula. You have a lot of other complications. So education, 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 and teaching boys and girls that it's okay to have baby, but have it by choice. You know, you need to make that choice that you are ready and you can afford it and you can care for that child instead of just having a baby by chance. We have a section in Liberia where we got all these young girls with baby and we ask them and they say, oh, where's the dad? Well, he said that's in our local vernacular, that's your Dutch. You leave a whole child and you say that's your Dutch. Okay, and there's no father to care for that child. The girl's 16 or 14 years old. Mm-hmm. And so family planning have gone into that community now. PSI is into that community, educating not just the mothers, the grandmothers. We have a whole generation that's still having babies. So we thought it wise to move family planning into that, to educate them. It's not that they want to do it, but because they don't know. So we believe that if you, with enough awareness, education, condoms, if you can, have them in all of the schools, have them in all of the areas, so people know that they have a choice.
So we should point out you're the Minister of Gender and Development, so this is something we would expect you to say. And I'm curious, what's the political reaction? What is the parental reaction, and also what is the political reaction to your ideas on this front?
The political reaction is that really at government level, the growth of population right now is so high, especially among the young people between the age of 0 to 25. How do you control that? I mean, our population, 65% of our population is within that age range. So something has to be done. And who are having these kids? Kids are having kids. Yeah. So the political will, by allowing family planning, working with the Ministry of Health, working with other international organizations that into reproductive health and rights, working with them at all levels, from the national level to the local level, ensuring that the message is out there, that is being taught in school. So government itself is putting money in the budget. I think the last budgetary year, I have the senator sitting right there. We hope they can put more in our own budget so that we can be able to do the work, to put $1 million into the program. So it's been working, but last year was a terrible year because you all know that Ebola hit the country, so everything was at a standstill. We are in the process now working on a new budget for 2015-2016. We're hoping that we will put a fair amount in there as government and the legislature can approve that, so we'll be able to intensify our awareness and our education on reproductive health and rights.
All right, very good. That concludes the moderated portion of our conversation, but we've got some very wonderful discussants who I think have questions. Yeah? Would you want to take the podium?
Hi, do I need to introduce myself? No, I'm Sajida Amin from the Population Council. And my question is about something that's been alluded to by all the speakers, which is that we have rising evidence that girls' education is really critical to all sorts of processes. And I was really struck by a very recent publication from IASA, which shows the very strong impact of girls' education on climate processes, promoting resilience. And we know from a health perspective, from a population perspective, that investing in girls' education has long been recognized as one of the major ways of slowing population growth. I come from Bangladesh. I work in southwestern Bangladesh, which is already underwater most of the year, for long parts of the year. And even in that setting, there is evidence that families that have more educated profiles are more resilient and do better. So, but my question is, something as genetic as girls' education, that's sort of generally recognized as a good anyway, how do you make that climate change as an essential part of a climate change agenda?
Anyone eager to jump on that one?
I think it all comes back to women being empowered participants in development. You know, if women have choices, if women have knowledge, we have to have faith in them that they'll make the choices that are right for them, and that applies to the family size and spacing issue too. We can't decree that, but we can say it's your right to choose. It's your right to have access to services. It's your right to be empowered. And I think girls' education is absolutely basic. And it again is another of those development interventions, if you like, which has so many flow-on effects for the status of women in the community, the ability to participate in a meaningful way and make a big contribution in decision making. There's also research evidence now that shows for every extra year of education a girl has, the children she's likely to have in the future will be healthier, live longer, and have higher expectations because mother had higher expectations. So all this, I think, then feeds into the conversation about the role of women in combating climate change and combating disasters, that women absolutely have perspectives. Those perspectives have to be totally at the table, taken into account when the strategies are drawn up. So for me, it goes back to empowered women, women with knowledge, women with choice, women able to participate, women able to move past the constraints that previously were put around their participation in the society.
Dr. Adams, you want to jump in?
Just to make a further comment. So I was overseas for many years. I'm a foreign service officer, and when I returned, one of the phrases that had entered the sort of discussion of all these is best buy, and the concept of a best buy in development, where you both for a modest outlay of financial resources have a huge impact, and an impact across a variety of sectors. And certainly girls' education falls into the category of a best buy. I think in the SDGs, it's actually in the specific SDG goal on climate change, there's a lot of scope for including interventions that might not seem to be immediately related, like girls' education, because that SDG does focus specifically on women and youth and marginalized populations. So I think the place to begin to translate that into more concrete action is actually at the national level. So, and maybe that's starting to happen now, that countries are beginning to develop those national action plans. And I think that's the place for advocacy and for trying to really bring together a very aspirational level with something that is more practical and translatable into actions in countries and communities.
Because it's a really great question, I think we should. This is an opportunity to say something about accountability. Girls' education is something no one disagrees with. Everyone says that they support it. How do we hold people accountable after they say, yes, we want that? I mean, it doesn't seem to happen everywhere. So accountability is clearly a challenge. You seem like you're ready for this one.
No, I agree with you. I mean, even in the MDGs, girls' education was mentioned in there, but who are accountable to ensure that it happens? So in the SDGs too, I sure there will be something about girls' education, but you're right, it starts from the national level on to the international level. Yes, if girls are educated, when it comes to climate change, when it comes to the environment, they'll be better able to protect themselves and prevent themselves from.
All right, do we have another discussion? Sir?
Dr. Jacques Bissaro. I founded an organization called Amani Global Works. We work on a beautiful island between Rwanda and Congo on Lake Kivu. So you are all invited to join us. Like at least, let me just say this, at least in Africa and the communities where we work, if we still have some kind of social cohesion, it's thanks to women. So women constitute the backbone of our communities. If we've been able to accomplish even the little healthcare we've been able to build on this island and elsewhere, it's just because the women are very strong. But we know that climate change and environmental sustainability are central to our work in health outreach and education. what we have observed that is hindering our effort to education, yes, to teach people, communities, in simple actions such as washing hands to prevent transmissions of disease in children, and diseases that really often leave women to deal with all these problems in the community. They're all left alone. And what is hindering that effort is just lack of just sanitation infrastructure. And similarly, what we've similarly to sexual reproductive health and right, women cannot achieve the most positive health outcome just because we lack just simple environmental infrastructure in these villages. My question to all of you is how can we work toward integrating health and environmental initiatives when presenting campaigns to local populations? Or how can we bring all NGOs together, NGOs that work in health, environmental issues, climate change, to work together to present solutions to sexual reproductive health and sustainability concurrently in these communities?
It's a good question, right? If you go to the Aspen Institute's website, the Sexual and Reproductive Health and Rights page has a lot of other issues there. I mean, it's a driver of many, many, many different things. You could even argue that all these buildings and all these people are working on all these different things. They should just come here and give their money to this program, and we will incorporate your goals into what we're working on. So how, Dr. Adams, how do you think these diverse interests can be brought together?
Well, I guess it's a good question, and it points out the complexity, in some sense, of the issues in the world that we live in. And I think in some ways you get, you know that there are community leaders and civil society leaders who are tremendously motivated by one or another social problem. And you don't want to necessarily distinguish that fire and that emotion and the dedication that a community group or a community leader can bring to an issue like reproductive health, or to an issue like gender discrimination, or to an issue like environmental degradation and climate change. So I think it's a good question to begin to think about how you maintain that and don't lose that, what people bring to it out of their own passions, but how you can put it all together in a way that is better than just those individual actions. And I think there's a role for educational institutions, and certainly a role for governance institutions in particular, local government and national government, and a process by which people can add it up so that it isn't, in fact, quite so siloed, where you might be able to get a lot further if you brought those people together. Not necessarily having everybody do everything, because that often just is a demotivating factor, but using those local institutions, and particularly governance institutions, to try to add it all up to something that gets progress made further.
But let me.
You want to jump in?
Please, Minister.
Let me just say, coming from the Ebola, I think we learned a lot of what the community can do. It was involving the community from the local level that got us to where we are right now in terms of fighting the Ebola. So using that same method in involving the community and giving the community the power, empowering the community to do that. Talk about sanitation, all of that has to come from the community level. The community has to own it in order for it to work. And I think that is something we'll take back in terms of working with the community for climate change, reproductive health and right, is you have to go back to the community, give them that, and let them run with it, instead of you just going and telling them every day, this is what you do, this is what you do. No, you teach them, you empower them, and you let them carry out the message.
Administrator Clark?
Yes, I was going to make a similar point, that it's often the experts that think in the silos. But if you go to the community level and say, what are the needs around here, they'll see all the links between what's happening to the environment and what their needs are for economic empowerment and social empowerment and so on. Again, I think that creates the basis then for working with communities on these integrated programs. That you touch one button it's got ramifications for others. And I've been, as I've sat here, I've been thinking of a lot of examples I've seen of the multiple impacts. I mean, with climate change, for example, you can be very subject to sea surges, right, which affect your land, actually eroded away in Bangladesh. And in a lot of areas of our coastline around the world, the mangroves have gone. I've seen mangrove restoration in Bangladesh. I've seen it in Senegal, where it not only was doing that protective function with low-level mangroves, unlike the very tall ones I've seen in Bangladesh, but the fish stocks came back. So there was then food, there was protein, which was good for health. The women were doing the harvesting of the fish and the shellfish. So it lifted their economic status in the community. So if we go back to the community needs, what do you think the development priorities are, and work from there? And if national plans are sensitive to that and the overall way they're designed, mixing the national and the local has to be the way forward.
Sir?
Thank you very much. I'm Roger Mark D'Souza from the Woodrow Wilson Center, and I come from a small island in the Caribbean, and I share that perspective because those of us who are islanders appreciate these issues in a very real way, and we sometimes look at what's happening globally and think, what is wrong with these people? And I think we agree with you, and I'll take up one of Tony's expressions, shift happens, but shift is happening at the community level. And my question for you is, why is shift not happening more quickly at other levels, particularly in the political sphere? How can we create political will, and how can we get financial resources behind these issues? So if you can talk about that, political will, financial resources, and what are the challenges to doing that, and where are the opportunities?
Very good question. Mr. Cassell, I feel like you're in the political thick of it right now.
Very good question. And if you notice today, I brought with me the senator, when I was senator from Liberia. I know they do the budget approval, so it's important for them to be part of this discussion. But what we are working with is, like I said, from the community level. And yes, during rallies or political season, before you just vote for somebody, you want to ask them, what do you bring to the table for my community? What are the needs of the people in the community? You know, instead of the politicians just taking their platform to the people, they need to get from the people what it is that the people need so that they can form part and parcel of the platform. So working with the lawmakers, the legislature at all levels, working with the community members, identifying what their needs are, and then ensuring that they represent the people, they are the direct representative of the people, that these things are carried down to the community level. So we'll continue to work with them.
Dr. Adams?
So I think one of the things that's important, and it's cuts across these areas, is information and data, and actually using data and integrating it and making science and data important. And actually, right before this, I told Roger Mark the story of my last overseas assignment was in China. And one of the things that happened when I was in China was when we moved the site of the U.S. Embassy, we put an Environmental Protection Agency air quality monitor on the roof of the American Embassy, and began for the first time to record and then to publicize air quality data. And this had a tremendous impact. First of all, it was the first time that data was actually gathered so that you could tell what the pollution level was in Beijing on any given day, and then it began to be disseminated. And people began to use that data very actively in their lives to decide whether or not schools should allow kids to go outside and do sports that day, or little kids could go out to recess or not. And more there was a demand, and you began to see a shift where people were much more aware and much more aware and comprehending of what this could mean for them as individuals and for the city as a whole. So data is important, and having it in a form that is intelligible and can point in the direction of action is important, I think. Related to climate change, to begin to see what that means for individuals, for people, not just for the entire planet, and then to point in a direction where you might be able to see some actions that you could take and participate in as an individual and as a community.
Yeah, the science is definitely important. Unfortunately, in the U.S., it seems as though science can be neutralized or taken apart by the opposition. When I talk to scientists about how they would like to communicate their research, they say, well, what we'd really like to do is if carbon emissions could have the same color as smog, if we could see them, if we could somehow add some food coloring, that would change everything. Because then it wouldn't be a far-off problem, it'd be in your lungs. So.
Thank you. My name is Clive Mutunga, Family Planning and Environment Advisor at U.S. Agency for International Development. I'm going to dig deeper into the question that Roger Mark posed and go to a specific blend of resources that is supposed to be supporting adaptation in the name of adaptation finance. We know it's limited given the adaptation needs throughout the world, and hence the need to really be more innovative and see how issues like women issues, including family planning and reproductive health, can be funded with the limited financial resources, because most of the adaptation interventions are mostly the usual water resources, agricultural activities, which are less controversial as family planning and reproductive health issues. So my question would be, I would like to hear more from the implementing partners, because a chunk of the adaptation finance goes through some of the implementing partners, including the UN agencies. And this is where there is a great potential to make sure that the recognition at the policy level translates into specific programs and projects. What are some of the opportunities that exist really to ramp up some of the social sector investments, which might not be seen to be producing adaptation benefits, unlike some of the more traditional interventions like water resource harvesting or agricultural investments? Thank you.
Well, the reality might be that things come out of different funding streams, but what I think is critical is that at the national level, there is a clear strategy for sustainable development, which sees these things as very linked. And so that you do fund adaptation in that traditional way that you've described, but that you also have a strong priority on these huge enablers of development, like girls' education, like a functioning basic health system. Whether or not you'd get the Green Climate Fund redesigned or the Global Environment Facility funding criteria redesigned to incorporate sex and reproductive health, I don't know. It might be a long shot. But that's not the only funding stream. There's other funding streams. The key thing that is that it be coordinated in comprehensive strategies by governments, so they're not dropping the ball on any of the strains of sustainable development. Perhaps I could add that this new Sustainable Development Goal agenda is a big and complex one, when you have 17 goals and 169 proposed targets and who knows how many indicators. And one of the big items on our agenda at the UN Development Group right now is, well, how will we support our partner countries with an agenda this big and complex? And one of the first things we'll want to do is work with the partners on what's the level of awareness of this and what it means across government, parliamentarians, media, civil society, private sector. And secondly, to move quite quickly to be talking with the government partners on, well, your national development strategy, where does it link up with this? Are there, clearly gaps which would need to be plugged? Are there capacities that need to be built? But our objective will be to see the sustainable development in its totality advanced in country according to the internationally agreed agenda, and not see balls dropped.
Sir.
Thank you. I'm Jason Bremner from the Population Reference Bureau, and I'll follow on to the last question and the last response, which talked about the the complexity or the long shot of this being within multilateral funding streams, and then turn to perhaps then bilateral funding streams? And are there better opportunities or easier opportunities perhaps to look at the bilateral level, USAID programming, DFID, other development partners that might lead to funding, family planning, girls' education, social investments in the line of climate resilience and climate adaptation? Thanks.
Complex. Want to jump in, Dr. Adams?
Sure. So I think that's probably where USAID is a nice complement to some of the multilateral organizations and to national governments, because we are a pretty decentralized organization, and one where country strategies are developed at the national level along with other partners in countries. So it provides an opportunity to really respond to local priorities and to local needs. And it also, increasingly in our systems, there's scope for bringing together what maybe in the past were pretty stovepiped funding streams and offices, so that you can have examples where you bring together water experts and health experts and bring together certain types of development projects into a more complex whole. So one example that we've been working on for some time is a program in environment and population, environment, and reproductive health, and actually supporting fellows who come from one or another of those backgrounds to work cross-sectorally. And sometimes that means just looking at improving the use of natural resources at the same time that you're dealing with health issues. And sometimes it means going into very precarious geographic regions where all of those problems exist but are very much mutually dependent. And as you said about small islands, you begin to see very quickly what some of those interrelationships are. So certainly from a bilateral donor perspective, that's something that we very much value, and we value the ability to do it on a sort of country-by-country basis, following the leads of the national government and other partners.
I think it comes back to the concept which Jennifer used earlier of the best buy. Yeah. When you get the best bangs for the buck in development, and you get it from these integrated initiatives where you're hitting a number of sweet spots. I mean, we look for that in our work. My point with the previous question was to say there will be different funding streams. The issue is how you actually bring them together to get the integrated results and outcomes that you want. I'm confident that the different funding streams enable us to do this, but we have to consciously catalyse, leverage from, coordinate, and see that strategies too are joining the dots.
Well, when the funding question comes all the way back to taxpayers, maybe we need to design a Best Buy catalog. Yeah. Maybe we can they sell a lot of electronics, so those guys know what they're doing.
My name is Femi Oke. I'm an international journalist with Al Jazeera English. But more pertinent to this conversation, I am a retired and recovering meteorologist. So welcome to my 12-step program. Thank you. So I have spent years of my meteorological career trying to tell people about climate change. So finally, people are having everyday conversations. They're making these connections. It's taking some time to get that traction to happen. So I would like the panel to answer as if they were not on a panel, not in front of people where they have to say the right things. They were socializing amongst themselves and being unbelievably honest with the answer to this. What would be and what are the pros and cons of linking sexual and reproductive health rights as an issue to climate change, where people are still trying to work out how do we put this into policy? Honestly, pros and cons.
Well, what's the con? I mean, sexual and reproductive health and rights is so evidently a good thing to me that I will try to link it to other important global challenges and see if we can get, responses that integrate and bring together and leverage from each other. Now, it wouldn't take a genius then also to know that not everyone is receptive to these messages. Right? Not everyone's receptive to the sexual and reproductive health and rights message. And I think it's fair to say that many of us would be somewhat disappointed with how the SDG agenda is currently positioned on that. It's seen as less progressive than what was agreed in Cairo, for goodness sake, 21 years ago. I mean, we don't make a lot of progress on a lot of these issues. Similarly, the climate change issues, doesn't get a ready audience in many places because not everyone follows the science. But as advocates, we have to push the issues out there and say that they're important. They've got to be dealt with. We've got to see the links, and one good thing could lead to another.
Are you actually driving at a question of cannibalization? There's only so many voices.
Would you pitch your really important issue to someone which is not the most popular of conversations to have? Sexual reproductive health rights is a challenge by itself to get people on board. And it's obvious.
Right.
Really obvious.
Eat your broccoli and you can have some asparagus. It's bringing two things together that no one...
So why would you pitch it to this, unless is there grant money involved? Is there a way that it's so popular, everybody wants to be in on the climate change conversation? To me, it was like, I'm not sure whether it does your cause as sexual reproductive health rights any benefit to link it to climate change, which is like way back there anyway.
I do think. You want to jump in?
Just a quick comment on that. I definitely see your point, but I think probably people who depart from climate change and people who depart from the sexual and reproductive rights agenda probably both feel like their issue is somewhat neglected and hard. That you probably get that feeling from both people that they've had to work so hard to make any progress and to have any recognition and to have any understanding of their issue. So maybe at least they have that in common, and there's a certain sympathy between the groups. I also think the other reason for it, as we said really at the very beginning, is that in some ways for individual women who live in tough places and with a lot of different challenges, this all does really come together. The health and the environment and the impact that has, as well as the ability to plan and to use family planning and to think about their family's future. It all comes down to issues that you can't entirely separate at the level of those people. So I think that's another reason why they're joined.
Well, I also think that climate change is a totalizing issue. It is planetary, and as a result, all issues in a way come under that header. If you accept the science. So it's sort of natural that you would have to, if you are a believer in sexual and reproductive health rights, file your energies underneath this bigger one. Does anyone else want to jump in?
But just for conversation for me, I know you're from Africa, I'm from Africa too, but this, say for example, in Liberia right now with climate change, you have 12 months in a year. 9 out of the 12 months is what we call the rain season, and heavy rain. And right after the season is when you have a lot of our young girls pregnant.
Yeah.
So.
And a lot of these seats are empty probably because it's a sunny day and it's Friday. And people with sexual and reproductive health rights are engaging in them right now under the cherry blossoms. There's a sexual congress in session right now. That's what I'm saying.
If I could unretire from being a meteorologist for a moment.
Okay.
The rainy season is wet. Sorry. The rainy season is weather, not climate, right?
It's climate because it's longer time than normal.
How about this? Maybe
But I do take your point. Excellent point. Maybe I need to move to Liberia during the rainy season.
Isn't there? Yeah, go ahead. Jump in.
I just want to provide another response to this, and that is that if those of us who are supportive and rights-based in this conversation don't make that link, then there are others who will do it in a less appropriate and less rights-based way. In other words, it becomes, suddenly it's not about sexual reproductive health and rights. You have people on the environmental side who will still bring up the old lexicon of population control, and it's not the proper framing of this connection. And so if we don't claim this space and make that connection, you can be sure that others will do it less productively.
And what I was going to say earlier is that there are some studies, and people here will correct me if I'm wrong, that suggest that if family planning were available to all the people who desire it, by their choice alone and their access to methods, the population would fall in such a way that we would actually meet our carbon reduction goals and stay below the 2 degrees of warming that scientists are warning about. So this 3.7 billion or whatever, a modest sum relative to the other things that we spend our money on, could get us all the way there on climate change. At least in theory, according to one paper, so maybe not at all, but I say. At this point, I think we're opening it up to the crowd, so if anyone's got any other questions, there's somebody there. Are we going to bring microphones over?
Nancy Harris from JSI. Wonderful panel and good discussants. I wanted to ask a question of the panel, and how are you going to breach the language barrier? And by the language barrier, I mean 2 things. First of all, is the barrier of the multiple streams not understanding each other. Years ago, when we wanted to link literacy and health, we thought that was a no-brainer. We made the amazing discovery that the 2 disciplines absolutely didn't understand each other. They spoke 2 different languages, technically. And the other is the language barrier between the 10,000 feet policy wonks and theoretical people and ordinary people. The big thing in World Bank, and I've finally come to terms with it, is the term agency. In women's development, we want agency. Well, if you ever went in a village and heard a woman say, "I want agency," I'd like to know about it. So how do we translate? Also, people in the village don't say, "Well, I'm trying to increase our contraceptive prevalence." That's another one that kind of gets to me. Tell me how we do that in a way that doesn't demean one group or the other.
Maybe impossible, right? I mean, as a journalist, I appreciate any call for direct language and frank conversation. But I think the problem with direct language and frank conversation is that it's subjective. It's in the eye of the beholder. And so the words that I would choose in my most casual setting would probably be offensive to someone else, whether I intend to offend that person or not. And the same, I'm sure, is true of the words that other people would choose in a more private setting. So I think that we end up falling back on these somewhat waxy, kind of dead words because they are the gentle ones. They're like the smooth rocks we can all hold in public.
I think, in a way, one of the biggest challenges in development is to understand what anybody's saying. I agree with you. The term agency is ridiculous to me. It doesn't denote anything. I go to conferences on structural transformation. I say, well, what do you mean? Capacity building. What are you building? How are you doing it? What do you actually do? I spent my life in politics where you had to say what you meant and mean what you say as well. But plain English, plain language gets you a very, very long way. So it is a challenge. It's a huge challenge. And again, maybe the minister and I hold hands and saying, go back to the community. What's the community understanding? What are its needs? How is the community expressing the needs? And then try and draw up the policies, strategies, plans in a way that honour and respect that.
That's a great point.
Hi, thank you. Camille Saade from FHI 360. Are we better off if we triangulate sexual and reproductive health rights and climate change with economic growth? Thinking about it, economic growth makes sense independently for sexual reproductive health as well as for climate change. Why aren't we thinking of strengthening the link between these two, which so far is a little bit tenuous, by calling on economic growth? This is the business of everybody at the individual and at the global level, at the planetary level.
Calling for economic growth as a solution for all?
Well, not true, but
Linking
probably a link, a strong link, a common denominator.
Well, I think there are opportunities exactly in this, and it's around how you make the transition to the green and more inclusive economy. And I would recommend the report that's been done by the new Climate Economy Commission, chaired by former Mexican President Calderon, which Lord Nick Stern and I and a number of people were on, which makes the case that we need to see the huge opportunities in an economy which is greener and more inclusive, opportunities for jobs and livelihoods, new exports, products, services, technologies, drivers of growth, etc. And if we link the green side to the inclusive side, and inclusive, of course, inclusive women and everyone else who's not so fully included at the moment, then that also will bring you into a conversation about sexual and reproductive health, won't it? And women being able to make the choices about their lives as to how they want to spend them, the genuine choice I think there should be between how many children you have. Do you want to be at home? Do you want to be in the economy? A lot of people don't have those rights at the moment, going back to the basic lack of empowerment. So yes, the economy is an entry point for this conversation.
But are we using it enough?
Increasingly, I think we have to, because some people only hear economic arguments, right? They don't hear the sexual and reproductive health argument, don't hear the climate change argument. But if you're talking economy, in a world where a lot of economies are struggling for growth and opportunity and job creation, you can say, actually, there is a way here, so it becomes an entry point to bring more people into the conversation.
But there is a hole in that bucket, because a lot of people who are extremely passionate about climate change policy happen to think that we need to slow down our growth, and that growth is part of the problem.
Well, you can't tell any developing country that, and that will take you straight back into ideological debates which say, you people developed by stripping out your forests and degrading the environment. Now you're asking us not to do it. And we have a right to development. So that's not a cul-de-sac to go down. So if you approach it from the green and inclusive economy perspective, and the need for support for adaptation and for mitigation and for development and for technology transfer and knowledge exchange and the rest of it, then you get into a much more powerful and useful conversation.
Exactly. This is what Jason was making a hint to, right? When you said we better address it proactively instead of letting it deviate and be misinterpreted and misused.
Anyone else want to jump in? It looks like somebody right there.
Thank you. Fabio Castaño from Management Sciences for Health. Could you please, wonderful panel, thank you. Could you please say something about youth, the policy, and the relationship with gender, climate change, and mostly talking about, what is the action?
So youth is a subject that at USAID we just spent a lot of time kind of working on, coming up first and foremost with a policy, and then now most recently, I think quite recently, a new activity that is very much cross-sectoral. So it is one of those topics that really cuts across much of what we're talking about, including, I think, even the very big concept of economic growth, because that at an individual level, jobs, employment, a career, a future, very much on the mind of young people in every country around the world. So, so yes, I think it is of course very linked to everything that we're talking about, and it does in some sense require a little bit of a separate focus. And getting back to the language issue, it's also an area where you need a certain translator sometimes to be able to make sure that you're understanding what you're hearing and people are understanding what you're saying. But I think at USAID certainly, and I know everyone here would agree, we really see this generation and the size and the scale and the power of this generation as something that we really want to be able to work with starting now and in the future.
If this generation's invested in, the world has a tremendous demographic dividend. If it doesn't invest in it, it's got a demographic nightmare. Why do I say that? Because in my experience, young people who are not in work or livelihood or educational training are a problem in any society. They're in my society, they're in this society, they're in developing countries. And where you don't create opportunity for youth through education, training, skills, livelihoods, ability to participate, where you exclude, you will reap the cost of that. Yes. And we see it in many manifestations of youth being attracted to the criminals, the guys with the guns, the guys with the extremist cause, whatever. So we have an opportunity, and that we're not realising that opportunity. We're leaving it to other malign forces in our societies to capitalise on this dividend. I think it's one of the most pressing challenges in development today is how to create a world that offers opportunity for youth, not despair, alienation, exclusion.
And like I said, our countries are very youthful countries, so we do have a national youth policy that's being implemented and is a top priority in our agenda for transformation.
Hi, thanks again to the panel for a really vibrant discussion. Sylvia Cabas from the Bureau of Food Security and USAID. It's really been frustrating to me the lack of sectoral coordination, and I'm really glad to hear of ongoing efforts within the agency and with our partners to harmonize all our efforts. And an example that comes to mind that integrates all these aspects that we've talked about is early marriage. I recently came back from Burkina Faso, where I was asked to do a study on gender and resilience, and we found that early marriage is an important coping mechanism that communities use when they're faced with stressors like climate change and desertification. And you can see already what the implications are for food security, because you have one less person to feed in the household. You get an economic benefit through the dowry. But unfortunately, all the things that I'm talking about are housed in different parts of the agency, and so it's really hard to sell this to the Aggies because they say, we want to increase production and income, but it's also difficult to market this as a standalone project. Just the way we're structured, adolescent girls are under education, and early marriage is under health. Climate change is partly in one bureau and partly in another. Resilience is housed within our Bureau of Food Security. So even trying to respond to something that is so obvious, like early marriage, seems like an insurmountable challenge sometimes.
It's almost a question of who gets the credit, right? I mean, people want, I solved that problem. Right. They don't want to play on a field they're not going to get points for playing on. Is there a way out of that problem?
But often the answer is not immediately in the sector it might seem to be. I mean, most countries have laws against early marriage, but it's not stopping it, right? So, then you come to look at, well, what could stop it? And absolutely, the girls in school is critical. And then you look at, well, okay, there's these coping strategies because a girl in school is a girl who's not productive and she's a mouth to feed. How do you deal with that? And that can then lead, and we see this around the world, some of the social protection strategies are actually give financial incentive for keeping the girl at school. So she's not a liability, quote unquote, to the family, but actually it's paying her way. So what we've found with the Millennium Development Goals is working with a lot of countries to try and accelerate progress on a goal where it was a bit slow. Was never the shortage of a strategy that was the problem. It was often looking beyond the immediate sector to other sectors, and to really make progress you need to bring all the possible stakeholders around the table. Governments in their different silos of departments, the partners, the civil society, and really analyse what's standing in the way of making this happen, and how can we then join efforts to make it happen.
Last question.
Oh, yeah. Thank you. My name is Loazem from the South African Embassy. I just wanted to say thank you so much for the conversation and the vibrancy of the discussion. I guess the basic question that I have is that how do you make this a specific topic? How do you make it a priority to, especially the negotiators right now, you know, with the Lima just passed and Paris coming on. How we are talking about it is nice, we are agreeing, coming up with ideas, but how do we get the attention of the people that are talking about these negotiations right now?
Great question to end on. How do we get their attention, and would anyone like to predict success or failure in Paris? Will we get a binding agreement? Will it be aggressive enough, and will gender be part of it?
For a start, I think we need women on the negotiating teams, bringing the perspectives. That's pretty important. And some of us have been involved with initiatives where you support and train the women to be part of the teams and the civil society delegations to keep the pressure on and so on. That's extremely important. Do I think there'll be an agreement? Yes. Do I think that agreement will show us the road to keeping emissions under 2 degrees Celsius, the global temperature rise under 2 degrees Celsius? No. That means that this battle is far from over. We have to keep at it and at it and at it. I mean, you know, when I was a Prime Minister, we were always told that if global warming went over 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, we were in for catastrophic and irreversible climate change. Well, we're seeing some pretty catastrophic events out there now on scenarios that are heading us conservatively from 3 to 4 and even 5 to 6 by some estimates. So it's pretty urgent, and a lot more pressure needs to go on a lot more negotiators yet to get an agreement and a path to further action which will stop the worst happening.
And yes, I think they will reach an agreement, especially looking at the kind of women that's on the Global Council. You have Taja, you have Ellen Johnson, you have Mary Robinson, you have Ellen Clark. I think there are more women out there, so the gender perspective will be in that new agreement because gender has been there from Rio Plus 20, COP 17 and 21. So I think we're making headways when it comes to that. We just need to elevate the awareness and continue to talk about it and engage more of the stakeholders.
All right, final word, Dr. Adams.
We'll get there.
All right, good note to end on. I want to thank our panelists. Very lively discussion. Thank you. And the Aspen Institute, thank you very much.
So you